Skate Story was not really what I expected, but it's still a really interesting game. I expected something a little bit more arcadey instead, but it's very story-driven, which I should have gotten from the name, but from the gameplay I still thought it was going to be a little bit more arcadey. It does have some issues within the entire game. I didn't really like the story structure, how you couldn't go back and play through some older levels, and the graphics, while they are really unique and cool, did get a little bit too distracting for me when things would start exploding or just there's too much going on the screen. All in all, it's still a really fun skating game, and for the most part, it is pretty great to play on the Steam Deck. But there is one issue that I do think is worth talking about, and there is a change I would make for recommended settings to play on the Steam Deck. So in this video, we're just going to go over how it's running on the Steam Deck, why I would make a change to the default settings despite the verified badge, and whether I do recommend playing it on the go. If you want to see more videos like this, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. A copy of the game was provided by Devolver Digital for review. Thank you. Ahead of its release, Skate Story was verified by Valve, and I would say by their definition, it deserves it. The default settings for Skate Story run well, and for the first few hours, it will feel perfect at 60 frames per second. However, the cracks start to show later on, with parts in later chapters like 3, 4, and on showing some warning signs and slowdowns. The game will actually throttle the frame rate when it gets too heavy, going down to 45 to 48 frames per second at times. And if you're curious why I still think the verified definition does still fit for this, it's because if you set to 30 frames per second, you're going to have a perfect game. But honestly, this game feels great at higher frame rates, so personally, I would say that it needs some work. Now, we can mitigate this a bit by turning off ambient occlusion, which makes some of these areas stop throttling and stick closer to 60 frames per second, but there are still times it will drop regardless, especially in later areas of the game. Now, compared to a lot of other games that have these kinds of frame rate drops, it isn't as noticeable, but this kind of game, I want a stable frame rate, especially if I can make it higher. I even tried the settings for the Steam Deck that were recommended by the team directly, but it still had those moments of throttling, especially later on. So for the most stable experience, I recommend keeping the settings where they are, but setting the frame rate limit to 45. It does make the game feel a little bit less smooth, but it's still very playable and enjoyable. You can keep the game to 60 frames per second if you really want to, and still enjoy it 90% of the time, but it does feel odd when you're skating around as fast as you can, and the frame rate jolts down to the mid-40s in the middle of the level that you're skating in. For me, I just preferred keeping it at 45 and keeping the entire frame rate stable the whole time. This ultimately actually brings up battery life a bit because, you know, if you're trying to play at 60 frames per second, more battery is being used, and it still feels fluid. It's just a little bit less fluid than it would be at 60 frames per second. Now, the game does support 16:10 resolutions, has cloud saves, and controller support. And when all said and done, it looks fantastic on the Steam Deck and is very playable with the controller. So ultimately, would I recommend Skate Story on the Steam Deck? If you're going to be getting it and playing it anyways, then I say yes. It's a really fun game, and I loved going through the levels and skating through. It is a little bit distracting in later levels, especially when there's a lot going on the screen. I do wish there was some easier way to go back and play through the levels, maybe try to get the highest score, since there is a whole combo and point system, which is mostly used to fight bosses, but ultimately it is still a lot of fun, and I had a great time going through it, and it's really weird and crazy story. And yes, it is good to play on the Steam Deck. I played through the entire game on it, and while it didn't take a long time to beat, it was still a really enjoyable time where afterwards I really wish there was an easier way to go back and just play through the levels again because I really wanted to continue. I would say you can expect about a battery life of 3.5 to 4 hours when playing with our recommended settings. Thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like and subscribe button, and hit the notification bell to be notified as soon as our next video goes live. And a huge thank you to our patrons. You guys are awesome. See you next time.